Hello and welcome to The Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm your host and friend Pavan Chawla, and I have with me someone who's custodian of one of the most important bodies or associations in the industry that, when it comes to advertising, marketing, and media, one can count on the fingertips of one hand. Please join me in welcoming Manisha Kapoor, Secretary-General of the Advertising Standards Council of India, popularly known as ASCI. Thank you, Manisha, for your time at a very early hour, well before the working day begins. Very precious indeed.
Thank you, Pavan. Pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is entirely ours, Manisha. And thanks also to Vanshika Swami of Pitchfork Partners for having made this interaction possible. So, before we begin this conversation that I'm really looking forward to, Manisha, allow me to quickly introduce you to my listeners, only for those who might need to know and be inspired by the kind of professional I have with me on the Master's Voice podcast, which I conduct with MVPs, or the most valuable players or professionals of the industry. That's why it's the MVP, the Master's Voice podcast. Manisha Kapoor is an experienced marketing professional with over 25 years of experience in building brands and businesses. After completing her MBA from Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies, Manisha started her career with Hindustan Unilever and thereafter worked with Johnson & Johnson India in various marketing leadership roles. For almost 15 years, Manisha was also the brand and marketing advisor, first with MarketGate Consulting and later with Future Brands Consulting. Manisha has advised several corporates across diverse sectors on their brand and marketing strategies. Manisha has also worked with several NGOs and the government on development sector projects. So that's Manisha Kapoor, Secretary General of the Advertising Standards Council of India, popularly known as ASCI. Manisha, welcome once again to MVP, the Master's Voice podcast on Mediabrief.com.
Thank you, Pavan. Looking forward to our conversation today.
So without any further ado, let's begin. Manisha, ASCI has come out with a major report, what India takes offense to, a study of complaints received at the Advertising Standards Council of India. So tell us about the main reasons India gets offended with certain ads, the grounds on which it gets offended, and what are the main types of ads that have drawn the general ire of the public of India.
Yeah, so the report essentially, looks at all the complaints that we receive at ASCI. Of course, it is by no means an exhaustive read into this topic, but I think it's a decode of the kind of complaints that, people take the time to formally register. So we started to look at these and, try to read what some of the patterns were, that we were kind of seeing emerging out of these findings. It's also important to add that, when we looked at the data for this, we did not look at only ads that, ASCI considered to be violative of the code. We really looked at all the ads that were complained against, because in a sense, it was trying to put a pulse on what consumers were feeling.
Lovely, yeah.
In fact, close to about 70 to 75% of these ads did not violate, ASCI guidelines. But, we kind of looked at 6 patterns.
Right. That's a great clarification. I thought this was a little about also ads that were violative of the ASCI guidelines, but thank you for the clarification. And really nice that you made it broad-based to also include just what India responded to, whether or not they violated the guidelines, right? So yeah, please tell us the 6 patterns that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So the first one, was about people who felt that advertising was showing certain depictions which were, detrimental to progressive society or to good citizenship, kind of values. So whether it was showing women in derogatory light, whether it was showing kids perhaps misbehaving, or things which were shown as, what society would value as successful, but was not as broad-based and created an undue pressure on parents and kids, for example. So, that became, a kind of pattern to look at.
Right.
The second pattern that we saw was really coming from parents largely. And they found that certain advertising was perhaps embarrassing to watch with their kids or in a family setting. So, typically categories like condoms or lingerie did feature in these kind of complaints.
Right.
But also certain other ads which people felt were kind of not necessarily something before kids are ready to have a conversation around, let's say, physical intimacy, etc. These ads they felt could kind of lead them to these discoveries before they were ready in that.
Right. Inappropriate for children.
Yes, yes. The third pattern was again interesting, where people felt that certain depictions, they were kind of showing particularly women and youth in ways that they felt crossed a line. So, for example, if a woman was answering back, to someone in the family, or young people having disregard for seniors in their family, etc. So this was, where there was kind of a more independent depiction, of youth or women that a few people felt was problematic.
Oh.
So that was one pattern that we found. But as I mentioned earlier, for example, in this category, a lot of the ads did not really violate an ASCII code.
Okay.
So the fourth pattern that we saw was about men, feeling slighted or upset about how they were depicted in certain ads. And I think, some of them felt that, just as we would object to women, being depicted in a way that was not appropriate, the same also held for men. And, men being mocked, or being at the end of violence in a sense, even if the ad was meant to kind of be a humorous ad,
right,
or even some ads where people were reflecting on the attitude of men, and men just felt that are you therefore painting all men in the same kind of
with one brush. Yeah.
So I think these were some of the concerns that came in. Again, I think this on a case-to-case basis has upheld some complaints, and some complaints it hasn't.
Okay.
The fifth depiction was, around people reading into ads and feeling that, these are, kind of against our religious sentiments and religious values. And typically, it was, some of the ads, for example, were, where a certain motif, like let's say a kundali or a coconut, was used in a humorous way, and people felt that these are, kind of religious motifs and should not be mocked or made fun of, etc. So,
right.
Or any ad that had certain inter-religious kind of narratives, etc. Or, we found that there were a bunch of people who took exception to that. Again, in most cases, these ads did not violate the ASCII code, but, it just gives us a pulse of perhaps what people are thinking.
Okay.
The last one was, about in some way not wanting to confront reality, which is unpleasant. So, whether it was showing period blood in red color,
okay,
whether it is about, a lot of ads about non-vegetarian food, which are showing meat, etc. So, people found that was not comfortable, and, they didn't want to kind of, so while, that is what reality is, but there was a discomfort with confronting that reality on their screens.
Right.
So these patterns we found, as I said, in almost about 70-75% of the cases, these ads did not violate the ASCII guideline, but in some cases they did. But this just kind of gave, a sense of what people are feeling about advertising. How are they kind of absorbing or, having a problem with advertising? So I think this kind of became an insightful exercise for us to do and to put forth.
I think it's a great guidance also for marketers and people who use media to create engagements to empower businesses through advertising and communications that are for the public consumption. So, really very good. To my memory, this is the first time that ASCII has ever attempted and delivered such a wonderful report on this, on these aspects. Am I correct?
Yeah, so I think this is the first of its report, but Pavan, there will be many more. So, for example, we released our influencer report, which is of course about the monitoring that we are doing. That got
right.
So I think what we are trying to do is that ASCII has a very unique vantage point. Where we see certain patterns, we see certain insights, which we want to kind of share with the entire advertising ecosystem for them to kind of learn from it and decide for themselves. So, these are not prescriptive. We are not saying do this or don't do this, but it's just another piece of information or data you may wish to consider, before you make a creative.
Right. And from a very serious and a professional and a very circumspect corner that watches this whole thing and actually guides media marketing advertising professionals as ASCII does. So I think you're doing an amazing job there, but I'm sure it's a great teamwork. You have a lot of people, external and internal, all working together. So we'll come to that, and I'm sure you will mention all of that in the course of our conversation. But since we are talking about India's ire and complaints, and we are speaking about a mix of complaints from consumers and also ASCI members, general people and the members of ASCI, tell me, how many complaints did you receive from ASCI member organizations against other members or non-members for different types of alleged transgressions like plagiarism, etc., maybe in the last year or whatever period you have data for?
Yeah, so basically ASCI does accept what we call intra-industry complaints, which could be between two members, but also could be against or filed by non-members, and it could also the ads could also be against non-members. So we receive between 70 to 100 such complaints a year on an average. Of course, some years it could be a little higher if there is a very strong advertising war going out. But typically, between 70 to 100 such complaints a year is what we process.
Okay, all right. And this, of course, is apart from the complaints that you receive about ads violating the ASCII code. But this is a very specific aspect that I would like to talk to you about in a little more detail, because it's going to help marketers and practitioners, in the space to be careful about the kind of content they put out and what to look out for and what to be cautious about. So to guide marketers, Manisha, tell us the process and timelines taken for ASCI to help resolve complaints about ads by its members and others. The complaints like the 70 to 100 that you mentioned. How much time does it take? What is the process in brief?
Sure. So essentially, the process, there are two parts of or there are two kinds of processes. I will explain the general process first,
right?
Which is like any consumer would complain. I mean, the process remains the same, where you have to kind of let us know if there is a particular ad that you feel is either misleading or unfair in competition, as you mentioned, plagiarism, but also some ads that you feel are violative of the ASCII code, and our code has 4 chapters, which is on truth in advertising, which is, an ad should not be misleading. The second is about an ad being decent and appropriate for public viewing and, non-offensive. The third is that, it should not be about a product or a situation or show a situation which is harmful to consumers, especially children. And the fourth is about it being fair in competition, that, it does not unfairly denigrate competition or does not choose a point of comparison which is unfair or leads to an unsubstantiated kind of advantage.
Right.
So the first thing is that we do look at complaints like this which are in violation of ASCII code, and essentially the complainant will kind of let us know about what ad they have a problem with, give us their grounds for objections. Of course, because it is an intra-industry complaint, unlike in a consumer complaint, the identity of the complainant is revealed to the advertiser. When it comes from an end consumer, we don't reveal the identity, but when it's an intra-industry complaint, it's only fair that the advertiser knows that this is coming from a competitor and therefore is able to respond appropriately. Typically, unlike consumer ads or consumer complaints, here we also find that the complainant has a lot of technical data, right? So they may have their own test reports or market share reports, depending on what the alleged violation of the code is. So they will share all of that with us. The objections, etc., are shared with the advertiser. We receive their response. There is technical evidence that is provided. We have a very large and very prestigious panel of experts, from all kinds of different fields, from Ayurveda to microbiology to textile engineering to market research, pediatrician, dentists, etc. So, they look at the technical data and, kind of give their expert opinion. It then goes to the CCC, the Consumer Complaints Council, which is in a sense our public jury comprising both members of industry, but by a majority non-industry members, who will look at all the evidence, look at the submissions, arguments, and kind of, give out their recommendation.
Right.
So this is the regular process, which would take between 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how detailed the technical evidence is. So that may sometimes take a couple of iterations where the expert may want more clarification, etc.
Right, 4 to 6 weeks as per the normal route, and you have to have all the safeties and every fairness safeguard in the process very, very firmly in place. So yes, these things do definitely take time. if somebody wants to fast track the process? I mean, is there a way that ASCI can fast track it?
Yes. So this is a facility that we offer to our members.
Okay.
So if a member of ASCI wishes to file a complaint against another member of ASCI, so if it's not just regular intra-industry but intra-member complaint, then that is something that we can take as a fast-track complaint where a panel is specifically created to hear that complaint only. So it's a single complaint that is heard, by that panel. And that usually would, take place within, I would say, between 15 to 20 days, depending again on the technical evidence. So, if there is more technical evidence, then, there's an extra step of it going to the technical expert, their opinion coming in, a couple of conversations between the R&D team and the experts. So that is the part of the process that takes a little bit of time. And of course, we need to give the advertiser a few days for them to put their response together. But usually, in most cases, between 15 and 21 days is where a fast-track complaint would get resolved.
And what are the fees for normal and fast-track complaint resolution? Any special fees?
So there is no fees when it comes to our regular process. We of course don't charge consumers anything, but even industry organizations who want to file complaints against each other, we don't charge anything. There is a fee for intra-member complaints. It needs to go onto the fast track because there the panel is specially constituted only to hear one complaint. So that's, paid for service. We also have other paid for services, which are reviews and also independent reviews, which is the appeals process. So, if you're not happy with the decision that a CCC has taken or, the fast track panel has taken, we also have processes, for appeal. But either you can submit additional evidence or, you would kind of like to re-argue your case or bring forth certain arguments that you feel the panel may not have considered. So those are paid resolutions that ASCI offers.
Right. That's really nice to know, Manisha. And you guys have been amazing custodians of the space, of the interests of the consumers and also the interests of, the businesses, whether they are members of ASCI or not, and their interests. So really fair. Very, very good. When we speak about, the most common areas or causes of complaints that ASCI receives from, members, or not about just violating the code, but when there's something really specific where, okay, my stuff has been copied or you are making a false claim and denigrating me or whatever else. So what are the most common areas or causes of, intra-industry complaints that ASCI receives?
So the most common ones are against what we call Chapter 1, which is on misleading ads. And usually the complaints are about a claim that your competitor may have made, which is seen as, not adequately substantiated or something which may not necessarily have scientific backing. So most of our complaints, in fact, even from consumers, about close to about 75 to 80% of our complaints, come from what we call Chapter 1, which is on misleading claims.
Okay.
So our Chapter 4, which is on fairness and competition, speaks of things like plagiarism, etc., kind of unfairly using somebody else's goodwill or brand name. But those are not, as frequent. Of course, we do get them. But usually, most of the complaints that ASCI receives, either from consumers or from competitors against each other, are about claims that are not seen as being capable of substantiation.
And what's really good, Manisha, is that ASCI also publishes and puts everything, places it all in the public domain, as a matter of public record. All these cases, the monthly CCC reports, and even the intra-industry complaints are things that will actually inform and educate people and professionals. So really good. Right, Manisha, let's, from specifics of this amazing report that you published and also how you all receive and tackle cases and the various processes, the two processes for them. Let's move on to something that I have a lot of respect for, also another thing that I have a lot of respect for ASCI for, and which is, all that ASCI has been doing and, how it's grown in terms of its relevance and how it resonates with the industry and how important every day, more and more, increasingly, it is becoming for everybody in the entire value system. Ever since it came to being in India, Manisha, how has ASCI served the space and how has it grown? A quick back of the envelope growth story.
Sure, Pavan, that's an interesting question. And I think even from, when we look back at, I think the journey of ASCII, it really is quite remarkable. So in the early 80s, a group of, obviously visionary marketeers, and advertisers kind of came together to say that we need certain guardrails, around ourselves. And let's remember in the days of no internet and, no emails, for them to kind of look at what were best practices around the world, use their networks to really decipher what would be a good code for the Indian advertisers to follow. They kind of put together the idea of ASCII and the code. And I must say that, we are 3 decades and counting, and the code is really the backbone of what ASCII does. And, at a fundamental level, that still kind of holds good. So, it just tells you how well it was thought through, at the time it was conceived.
Right.
Of course, the, being a new organization at that time, when ASCII started, it started, I think, for almost its first 15 years, looking at about 100 complaints a year.
Okay.
Pretty much, that was the kind of range. The CCC, I think, used to meet once a month, deliberate on its complaints. I think possibly the whole complaints process would take anywhere between 2 to 3 months. But of course, we have more from there. I think till about perhaps 2011, 12, we kind of doubled that number. We were looking at 200 complaints a year.
Okay.
But I think the exponential growth has really come in the last 10 odd years. Today we look at close to around 7,000 complaints a year. We process around 3,500 ads.
Wow.
And that's a huge amount in terms of, the volume of work that we handle, the number of complaints, just the amount of motor surveillance that we do. And I think that made a huge difference to the numbers as well. That, we have now technology tie-ups where we are able to scan, over 500 TV channels, about 700 print publications, about 3,000 websites.
Wow.
This is something that we do on our own, even without consumers complaining to us. And that's important because we are obviously able to catch misleading ads much faster. We're able to process them faster. So that's been an important kind of leverage that we've used via technology to be able to kind of look at all of these ads. So yeah, I think it's been a phenomenal growth story, particularly in the last 10 years, moving from around 200 odd complaints and ads per year to looking at over 3,500 ads and about 7,000 complaints in the more recent years.
Amazing. And I know that you've also been working very hard along with your team to get completely digital and, far more therefore enabled. So we'll come to that in a bit. But, today, just to continue in the same vein that we were talking about just now. For some time now, ASCII has been helping government ministries and bodies too. And it has also been working to market itself. I mean, spread awareness about the avenues it provides to businesses and consumers to complain against an ad that's not accurate or truthful. So, what is anything about this association with or supporting government ministries or bodies or initiatives that ASCII has been doing?
Yeah, so I think, there is a huge congruence of the objectives, of ASCII and certain government ministries. So whether it's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting or the Department of Consumer Affairs, FSSAI, Ministry of Ayush, all of them have certain provisions when it comes to advertising. And, that's where ASCII is really able to support the agenda of the government as well in these matters. See, regulation and self-regulation, when they coexist, actually provide for a very, very solid, robust solution for consumers, right?
Right.
Self-regulation is speedier, it is less expensive for the taxpayer. In fact, the taxpayer pays nothing, for self-regulation mechanism to be established and work properly. And the self-regulatory body can really work, we say, by exhaustion, and the government can work by exception. On cases that, we find are non-compliant, and, the government can really look at those and, figure out what penal action to take against people who continue to remain in non-compliance and keep peddling misleading ads. So this combination of, self-regulation and regulation works very, very effectively for consumer protection. And I think as part of that, we have done several projects with different government ministries. We are in close touch with many of them. We are regularly called upon to provide information, during Lok Sabha questions and Parliament questions that come in on misleading ads. ASCII is quoted extensively in Parliament.
Wow.
So there is a very, very close coordination that we work with the regulator. So of course we are an independent body,
Sure.
but the alignment with the government, I think serves the interests of consumers as well as industry in a very, very productive way.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And you've kept this momentum up and shiningly on. So, Manisha, you've been doing stellar work ever since you came on board, and you've been leading projects as if they were like your own passion projects. And when such support and direction and leadership comes from an evolved professional, I mean, Unilever and all the other brands that you've been with, you would have literally experienced the country from the ground up in even the most far-flung areas. And that finger on the pulse of the people, what's good for people, what's fair and what is really correct and accurate and not fake. So all these qualities, that assessment and your leadership together, I think you've come out with a lot of stellar work, a lot of reports, a lot of initiatives. But when you first arrived at ASCI, or when you arrived at ASCI, first to Superfluous, what were your first impressions of the body or the association?
I think my first interaction with ASCI, in fact, was when I was a brand manager and one of my ads was kind of, there was a complaint filed against an ad of mine. And I think for much of the industry, that tends to be the first interaction that people have with ASCI. ASCI kind of pulls you up for something. And of course, at that time, like all brand managers, I was kind of, very upset and said, who is this body that is kind of pulling up these things, and why are they kind of taking objections to the ads that I've made.
Right.
But cut to a few years later, I had the chance to be a part of the Consumer Complaints Council. I was there for close to 5 years, and
Wow.
I think that really kind of gives you an inside view into how ASCI functions and looks at complaints, the sheer variety and diversity of very, very highly talented and accomplished individuals sitting in a room, discussing advertising, representing different points of view, representing industry, representing consumers, representing different professionals. You sit in a room with doctors, lawyers, consumer activists, your colleagues from advertising, and you're kind of discussing a piece of communication. And that conversation is very enriching and very powerful.
Right.
So I think, those were in a sense my early introductions to ASCI. So a year before last, when I came on board to kind of take over the working of the Secretariat, I was very excited, I think, about the potential of the organization. And I think that we had focused and built a very, very strong organization, but it seemed to be a little unidimensional in terms of, policing the narrative, which is a very important job, and it continues to remain a very, very central part of what ASCI does. But there was also a whole new opportunity to support the industry in getting it right. If you look at any kind of regulator, and any kind of regulating body, I mean, if you look at, let's say, even the police, for example, right? Of course, they will catch people, when things go wrong. But if everyone in society was a criminal, I mean, there's no way the police could do its job, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
every regulator depends on 90 to 95% of people being honest and wanting to do the right thing.
Right.
And therefore, it makes a lot of sense for us to also strengthen our part of supporting people to get it right. How do we help advertisers? How do we kind of, educate them about what ASCI does, what its code is? For example, the report that we did on Gender Next, which is around gender depiction in advertising, is meant to be an insight and a new narrative starter. It's helping not just police the narrative, but shape the narrative in a more responsible way. It's about jointly coming together and saying, what do we as advertisers, what can we do better to be more responsible towards our consumers and audiences? So I think those are the kind of approaches that we've taken, which is to become much more collaborative in terms of getting it right. We launched an advertising advice service, where on a voluntary basis, you could send in your scripts or storyboards pre-production to ASCI.
Okay.
An expert panel who will look at it and tell you if there are any red flags.
Wow.
It kind of helps, again, multiple stakeholders. It helps the advertisers not make silly errors, in production, which are really, really expensive to correct later on. And again, we go with the assumption that, it's not the advertisers want to willfully mislead their consumers in most cases. Sometimes it is an inadvertent error or your interpretation of, a certain claim, whereas, when a neutral body looks at it, they may look at it differently. So we are able to kind of, create these services for advertisers to get it right and to support them and to help them create more responsible advertising so that One is that it saves them time, effort, later, campaign disruption is not something that anyone likes. But also from a consumer point of view, it's a win-win because some of these ads which were potentially misleading will not get into the market and will get into the market only as ads that are correct.
Yes.
So these are the kind of services that we are pushing, that we are launching, that we are educating our industry about. And I think that's the direction really that, we are kind of steering ASCI to. Though, like I want to reiterate, at the heart of it is still, making sure that ads that are misleading or unfair or objectionable in some way are kind of corrected. But we are looking at both prevention and correction as a dual kind of strategy to follow.
Excellent. And Manisha, I do think and I believe ASCI does amazing work. It is like the only line of defense against fake ads in India. And that's very important indeed. And while ASCI does name and stop fake advertising, unfortunately, it has not provided or proved to be rather a deterrent. There are always many repeat offenders. And the intervention also does come a little late after the major ad budgets have been spent on promoting the fake or inaccurate ads or campaigns. So, what solution do you see to that? I know that ASCI is not into naming and shaming, but to being proactive and preemptive, and you all have demonstrated that brilliantly throughout. So there is not a single question on that. But what solution do you see to that, Manisha, of, not only, when the ads are stopped, the damage has been done through the major ad spends, but that is not corrected by the errant advertiser. There is no system in India to enforce that. What's your view on that?
I think there are, as I spoke earlier, there is a role for self-regulation and there is a role for regulation.
Correct.
Self-regulation is a voluntary coming together of industry to say that we will create certain codes around ourselves and we will kind of voluntarily subscribe to those boundaries that we've collectively kind of put around advertising. The process of natural justice, which is saying the advertiser does have a right to express, which is guaranteed, under the Constitution. Vis-a-vis, of course, consumers have a right to be protected against what is misleading. And like I said, I think to me, the long-term solution really is around education, is around consensus building around what is appropriate and what is not. But yes, in the case of corrective, any corrective action, by definition can come after the act has been done, right?
Sure.
And I think if you compare it with perhaps the other remedies available to consumers, which is, let's say, in terms of consumer courts or the courts, I think, while we may say that, the action comes later, but I don't think anyone gives you, 4 to 6 week turnaround at zero cost. So in that sense, it's a huge advantage for consumers to have this kind of a forum where grievances can be published.
Absolutely no question on that. All I was thinking of was that all this amazing work happens, this mehnat, this toil happens, and it's really thankless stuff. It's just out of the passion and the commitment to serve society and to help the society that helps us grow, that people do it. And you're very careful about the constitution of the committee, the CCC, and how it's really working so well. All I'm saying is I wish there was perhaps the government or somebody else should step in and say, okay, we've seen this, we respect the place where this report is coming out from. And maybe, okay, so if brand A spent 2 crores on a fake ad or an incorrect or an inaccurate ad, it should go back to the same media spend and buys and correct it and say, sorry, I was wrong, it's not this. But that's like utopian, I think. But what you are doing is amazing, and I truly salute you with gratitude and with a lot of pride that India is doing such a wonderful job and you are leading this amazing body. Really, I'm a very literal person in terms of using the words that I do, and these words come from the heart. You guys are doing an amazing, amazing job. You've done a lot of things. A lot of initiatives have been taken by you, Manisha, and of course your team at ASCI after you've arrived. Do you want to quickly just tell me about the kind of, treasure trove that the ASCI website has today for every marketer, every student, every practitioner, even consumers, that will help them with the advertising, which will help them with, information on guidelines, different reports, different insights that they will all sort of collect from there. Even the course that you have, I think you help educate people, whether they are brand custodians or anybody else, on the entire code. So just give me the back of the envelope on why everybody should take a deep dive into the ASCI website and, really benefit themselves and their through society, which is a great thing. And that's your ultimate aim too. So please tell me.
Yeah, thanks, Pavan. So I think, the ASCIionline.in, that's our website, does have, a lot of information. See, we are in that sense a body for public good, and therefore, everything that we do is a matter of public record.
Right.
So right from who we are, who's on our board, who's on our CCC, what are the ASCII codes, what are our processes, what are the past recommendations. I mean, all of this is available on our website. I also want to tell you that we are in the process of, relaunching and redoing our website for it to become far more friendlier, much more updated in terms of technology and, much better kind of search functionality. So that I'm hoping, in another 3 or 4 months, that we would be able to kind of launch that. That becomes much easier for people to perhaps uncover the treasures that we have, which may be a little clumsy today, but we are working on that. All of the information that we create is a part of our public record. We have, in fact, a separate domain, called ASCII.social, which we created for influencers.
Okay.
Which has influencer guidelines. It has, certain videos by people from the industry. It even has a guide to guidelines, which, make it kind of break down the guidelines in a more practical, applicable kind of sense. It has a tool, where influencers can use whether they need to disclose or not. Some of them may be confused or unsure about whether a certain kind of post needs disclosure. So there is a tool you can kind of go through the steps and it will tell you at the end, if you've taken X, Y, and Z, then yes, you need to disclose or not. So those are the kind of things that we do. I think from an outreach perspective, we tend to get limited by some of our budgets, but it's an important part of, the work that we do, that we must reach out to people in the industry. We must reach out to students, who will be the industry of tomorrow. So there are a lot of conversations that are happening, around very exciting programs on education, on student learning, on industry learning. I think we hope to kind of, enhance our offerings in these areas in the months to come.
Lovely. You've also come out with a lot of reports, and I'm sure they also sort of are available to everybody on the site, right? Even now as we speak.
Yes.
Like what India takes objection to, and then the influencer guidelines, of course, and then the other reports that you spoke about.
Yes. So we have, in more recent times, we have 3 reports that we've released since, I think, October. So we have the Gender Next report, which looks at gender depiction in advertising. That's, to my mind, a colossal piece of work, an inquiry that was undertaken. Very, very rich report, full of insights, full of ways in which, we look at advertising but develop blind spots around certain depictions. So to my mind, that's a really fascinating report for advertisers, for students of marketing, for policymakers to kind of, refer to. And, it's not just an audit, but it also provides new starting points. So to my mind, it's really, really interesting and rich piece of work. You mentioned the offense report. We have our influencer monitoring report. So these are the 3 recent reports that we've done. Of course, our guidelines are part of our code book, and whether it's our influencer guidelines, whether it's our gaming guidelines. I mean, all the guidelines that we have are part of our code book, which is again available on our website for everyone to see. All these reports are also available on our website, and anyone can access them.
Amazing. So will they also be available in, at least the most important ones, perhaps in various languages? That might be a work in progress, I guess.
Yes. In fact, we were speaking with someone on whether some of these reports can be translated. So that's a conversation we are having. I think going forward, even for example, we are looking at revamping our complaint system, and we are trying to see whether that can be multilingual, as an input to receive complaints. So I think, yes, it's not easy, but it is something that we are cognizant of in terms of just reaching out to more number of people in India.
Wonderful, wonderful. I will also say most strength to you for being able to digitize all the documents and complaints that were there in physical form with ASCII. I'm sure that's also like a war effort.
Absolutely. So in fact, one of the big things that we've been doing for close to about 7 to 8 months now, and we should see the results of that very soon, is exactly to do this, which is to upgrade our entire complaint management system. So right from it being easy for a complainant to register, we in fact, even today, I would say that it's relatively easy. We have a WhatsApp number.
Yes.
With your permission, Pavan, if I can share the number here.
Oh, please go ahead.
So it's 77-100-12345. So that's the ASCI WhatsApp number. You can just WhatsApp, your complaint. It's easy. I use that a lot. A few lines about what I find problematic, and I just send it to, and then someone gets in touch with me, or they take it to the system if, everything is very clear. So it's a great way for people to kind of get in touch with us. But, we want to enhance that experience. We want to make it easier for advertisers to respond to us, for the CCC to review data, and for us to provide real-time tracking of complaints, etc. So there's a lot coming. And I think one of the big things that the new complaint system will also do in some time is to archive all the old knowledge, tag each of the complaints that have come to us in the past with, its category, etc. So it's going to become, much easier for our own teams as well as others to look at our old data, to recognize trends and patterns, which today has to be done manually. So, beyond a point, it can't be done. But we hope that, with this, really what we have today as data becomes much more insightful. So that's as you say, on a war footing, something that is happening within ASCI. The team has spent several hours and months working on this, and we hope that this will soon kind of significantly change the way in which people are interacting with ASCI.
Wonderful. Manisha, more strength to you. If I may say so without sounding patronizing, but I'm very pleased with the amazing work that ASCI has done, and gratitude to you with all humility on behalf of the industry, honestly, and I mean that literally. Manisha, I have enjoyed this conversation with you on The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com. Thank you for your time, and thank you so much for all the insights you've given us, and a lot of information that's really going to help industry professionals, which was my major reason of inviting you. And, with your presence, you've really elevated the stature of MVP, The Master's Voice podcast, with most valued professionals from the industry. Any thoughts on our conversation on The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com so far?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful platform, and Pavan, more power to you. And I hope you have many more wonderful personalities, on the show. And I look forward to hearing from them as well. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Pavan. Thank you so much.
You're so very kind and so gracious, as self-effacing as she's amazing as a professional and a person whom I am privileged to count amongst people I consider my friends from the industry. So thank you, Manisha. Thank you very much for your time. And thanks also to Vanshika Swami once again of Pitchfork Partners, who helped make this interaction possible. Manisha Kapoor, Secretary-General of the Advertising Standards Council of India, popularly known as ASCI, was my distinguished and amazing guest on this episode of The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com. I hope you found the conversation insightful, and lots of young professionals and Manisha's peers and the older professionals will actually find enormous benefit from this. Till we meet again in the next episode of The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com, this is your host and friend Pavan Chawla saying, take care, stay safe, bye-bye.